Hello and welcome back to another Warlords of Draenor boss preview. So today we're going to be having a look at Butcher on LFR difficulty. Now Butcher is actually the second boss in Highmaul, and he's the, well, second boss of the first wing, which should be pretty darn obvious. Now the thing with Butcher is that he is well, I'm not going to say he's a very hard boss in terms of mechanics, but his mechanics certainly do matter on normal, heroic, and mythic difficulty. However, in order to facilitate LFR being, well, not an absolute pain in the bloody arse, they have nerfed his mechanics quite a bit just to make it more possible. You see, the Butcher fight actually really does center itself around positioning and coordinating clumps of players in order to manage stacks of a debuff and a few other things like that. Now, of course, on LFR, that would be, well, that wouldn't be pretty, let's be honest. A lot of people would die, a lot of people would get very angry, and the fight itself would be a bit of a pain in the butt. Now, first of all, let's talk about what the tank's going to have to deal with here, because it does seem like this guy's got a few abilities that do matter to the tanks. Now, I'll talk about his clumping and cleaving in a little bit. Anyway, so for the tanks, he's got this ability called Heavy Handed. Now, this is interesting. Basically, all of his auto attacks are going to trigger a second attack on the next closest target within 5 yards, and then if no target is found, the primary target is struck again. So, Butcher does hit quite hard, and while in LFR you might be able to get away with this on one tank, if it's not LFR, you're probably going to want two tanks, that are here soaking up all that damage, because if that damage goes in, say, just like a regular DPS, it could really start to get them killed. Now, this will sort of play into a tank swapping thing in a bit. Now, he also does an ability called the Tenderizer. Now, the Tenderizer will hit his current target, i.e. the main tank, for a big whack of damage, and also increase damage taken by further attacks with Tenderizer by 50%, and this is a unavoidable attack. So basically, you want to tank swap with Tenderizer, and always make sure that his auto attacks are being soaked up by both tanks. Now, the Tenderizer is his first weapon, but he does have another weapon, and this weapon is called the Cleaver. So what the Cleaver does is it basically just puts a bleed on the target, and the bleed will stack. Now, it says here on the Dungeon Journal that the bleed will not be applied if the attack is avoided. So, here's the thing, I'm just not 100% sure if they mean if you use active mitigation on the Cleaver that it's not going to apply the bleed effect, or if it simply does mean you have to fully avoid the attack. So I suppose that really your tank swaps are going to depend on the Tenderizer and also the amount of stacks of the Cleaver's bleed that the tank has. As I suppose is normally obvious in my videos, I don't generally tank, so the best I can do is speculate, but I do want to learn how to tank in the future. I mean, I do know how to tank, I'm just not particularly skilled, so, I don't really try. Okay, so the next thing that you'll have to worry about as a tank is Meat Hook. Now, I'm only saying as a tank because this is labeled as a tank alert. It just says the caster pulls in their target with a Meat Hook. Anyway, so that's all the tanking stuff dealt with. Now we have to deal with the group components and the sort of clumps. So first of all, this is something that the melee players are going to have to worry about, and this ability is called Cleave. He basically targets the largest clump of melee players, and then he strikes them for a large amount of physical damage, and that damage is split between all targets within the clump. Now, anyone who's affected by Cleave will also be afflicted with a debuff called Gushing Wounds. Now, Gushing Wounds is just a regular bleed, but if you reach 5 stacks, you're going to die instantly. That's the super fun part of it. And the Gushing Wounds thing lasts for 10 seconds, I believe. So what's going to happen is that, well, basically if you're in melee, you want to watch out for Gushing Wounds, because obviously it can be quite a problem. It only lasts for 10 seconds on LFR difficulty though, so it's not a massive issue. I think this will be a decently interesting ability when we move into normal and, the other difficulty levels, but for LFR, it's perhaps a little bit dull. Another thing is that, of course, Cleave is going to hit your tanks. But the other thing about the tanks is that, his heavy-handed ability means that his auto attacks will hit the main tank and then someone else. So it will be very interesting to see how that plays out with the melee stack, because obviously, because the Cleave damage is spread around players, if only the two tanks take it, then it's going to be a bit of a problem. So that just means that all the other melee players really do need to be in a clump so that the boss doesn't target the tank with Cleave, because that would be pretty bad. So yeah, hopefully that'll work out okay. Though, like, I've just got to wonder how exactly this is going to play out, because if you're in, say, a 10-player group on normal or something like that, well, you're probably only going to have the tanks and then one stack of melee players. So we'll just have to see how that pans out. Anyway, the next thing that he does is Bound and Cleave. Basically, he does have this energy thing that ticks up, and you'll see that when his energy reaches 100, he does Bound and Cleave. Now, this knocks all players back, and then he charges at a clump of players and does Cleave. Now then, if you're not in a clump, I'd imagine that there's a very good chance the Cleave will just flat out kill you, i.e. if it hits maybe 1 or 2 players. So what you want to do after Bound and Cleave is just all get together in various groups so that Bound and Cleave does not destroy you. Again though, in LFR, this does not particularly matter in the slightest. So yeah, there's that. And then finally, he does a thing called Frenzy at 30% health, which just makes him go completely buck wild. He does 30% more, attacks 30% faster, and does 10% more damage. Now, basically, look, on LFR, all this fight involves is, well, honestly, just standing there and DPSing him. There were times that I even moved into melee range because I was curious to see what would go on with Cleave, and really no problems there. So overall, this is a very trivial fight in LFR. It just feels like Butcher, but on normal mode and Mythic, I think it could be really interesting. I didn't get a chance to test this fight on normal or Mythic, so I can't exactly comment on what it plays like. And the night that they were testing it, there was just lots of problems, and I haven't got back since. So, yeah, I think fundamentally it's a pretty cool fight, just that they had to make the necessary cuts in LFR to make it a playable experience for the LFR crowd. And even with that, at least the boss is jumping around the place and making you move and doing things, and that's, I suppose, interesting. And, yeah, I don't know, I don't think I've got anything else to say about this. The reason why this was a delayed video is because I just didn't think it would be as good as the Bracken Support and Kargath videos, because they are just excellent bosses on LFR difficulty. So, yeah, there you go, that's it. Let me know what you think about the boss, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.